The sun beat down mercilessly, scorching the parched earth and turning the dust into a shimmering mirage. Death Valley, like a malevolent grin, greeted travelers with silence and deadly heat. A dilapidated wagon, pulled by a weary mare, crawled slowly along the cracked road, leaving behind a trail of dust like the ghost of a forgotten journey. At the reins sat a man whose weathered face betrayed a life of hardship and deprivation. Time and the sun had etched deep lines into his face, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, seemed to see more than they should. His name was Elijah. He was a preacher, but not the kind one might find in saloons or town squares. His sermons were rare, and he found his faith in the silence, in the whispers of the wind, and in the silent majesty of the mountains. Elijah was heading west, searching for a place where he might find peace. But peace in these lands seemed a luxury, attainable only by the dead. He knew this firsthand. Once, before God graced his soul, he was known as Bloody Eli, a merciless bandit whose name struck terror into the hearts of the locals. The tales of his cruelty spread throughout the area like a plague. Now, atoning for the sins of his past, he walked his path, striving to earn forgiveness. His wounded soul sought peace, but the shadows of the past relentlessly pursued him. Beside Elijah in the wagon sat a 17-year-old girl, with a mass of red hair framing a face sprinkled with freckles, like a scattering of gold coins. Her honey-colored eyes constantly flashed, expressing a dislike for everything around. In them, one could see pain, anger, and despair. Her name was Sarah. She was an orphan, found by Elijah in one of the ruined settlements. He took her in, hoping to offer some solace, but her spirit seemed as hardened as his own once was. They paused by the dried riverbed to give the mare a drink and take a brief rest. The heat was unbearable. The sun blazed mercilessly, scorching the earth. Not even shadows offered respite from the inferno. Only a rare breeze occasionally swept across the parched ground, bringing fleeting relief. Elijah pulled a water flask from the wagon, extending it to Sarah. She grimaced, her lips twisting in displeasure, but she took the water nonetheless. Silence. Their constant companion weighed heavily on them that day. It pressed down on them like the scorching sand of the desert. "Are we far from the city?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy in the quiet. "Not close," Elijah replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sand met the sky, blurring into a single inviting mirage. "Why can't we just settle somewhere? Why must we trudge through this cursed desert?" Sarah clenched her fists, her weariness evident. Elijah sighed, feeling a pang of longing tighten his chest. He too craved peace, a quiet haven, but he knew a shadow of the past followed them, long and unrelenting. He hoped that someday he'd find a place to hide, where no one would know his true name, his sins. A place where his past would remain in the past. As they rested, the sun blazed overhead, and heat shimmered from the scorching sand. Suddenly, a group of riders appeared from behind the dunes. There were approximately 10 of them, swiftly approaching and kicking up thick clouds of dust. Their faces, hidden by rough bandanas, marked them as ruthless bandits. Elijah immediately knew that he wouldn't have a peaceful day. "They're coming for us," whispered Sarah, her voice laced with icy fear. Elijah nodded, feeling a chill crawl down his spine. His hand slid beneath the seat, retrieving an old revolver. It was rusty and had seen better days, but in his practiced hands, it remained a deadly weapon. Elijah knew he faced a battle today, a fight to protect them, himself, and Sarah. The bandits stopped just a few meters from the van, like predators stalking their prey. Their leader, a stocky man with piercing eyes like a bird of prey, dismounted and with heavy steps approached them. "Well, preacher," the leader sneered, his voice like grating metal cutting through the silence. "Found yourself some cover? You've come a long way with your holy mission." Elijah remained silent, maintaining ice-cold composure, although everything inside him was churning with tension. He understood perfectly that his past, like a sinister shadow, had caught up with him. These people, with their wary gazes and weapons at the ready, surely knew who he truly was. "We've heard you're not as simple as you seem," the leader continued, his eyes like two burning coals boring into Elijah. "Well, let's see what you're capable of." He gave a barely perceptible nod to his thugs, and they, like wild animals, began to slowly but surely close the circle around the old van. Elijah glanced at Sarah. She, eyes fixed on him, was frozen in terror, her pale face contorted in a grimace of deadly fear. Elijah knew he had to make the most difficult decision of his life: become bloody Elijah again, that monster from his past, or die trying to preserve the remnants of humanity he desperately tried to protect. The first cries echoed, followed by the clash of metal. The fight had begun. Elijah, despite being over 60 years old, moved quickly and precisely, his movements honed by years, decades spent in brutal battles. His hands remembered the art of marksmanship. One by one, the bandits fell, struck down by precise shots, like sheaves in a harvest field. He knew no mercy, for he had once been one of them, a sinner who had chosen the path of darkness. Sarah, huddled deep in the van like a frightened animal, watched the bloody carnage. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched the man she trusted implicitly, coldly murder people. Soon, only the gang leader and Elijah remained, their gazes locked, like two blades poised before a deadly fight. "You sold your soul to the devil, preacher," the leader rasped, his face contorted in a grimace of pain, blood spilling from his lips. "I'm trying to get it back," Elijah replied, his steely eyes fixed on his adversary. A short, desperate shootout ensued. Elijah, groaning with pain in his old bones, still proved quicker than his foe. The leader fell, struck down, and silence, unfamiliar and oppressive, descended upon the valley once more. Only the wind, like a grieving spirit, rustled in the tall grass. Elijah lowered his revolver, his hand trembling, his fingers numb with cold. He surveyed the battlefield, littered with lifeless bodies, and a lump formed in his throat. He had won, but at what cost? Sarah emerged from the wagon, staggering. Her face, pale as chalk, reflected horror and disgust. Her eyes seemed to have absorbed all the pain of the place. You monster," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Elijah understood. He had lost much more than just trust in her eyes. He had lost something he would never be able to regain. He had lost all hope of redemption, as if darkness had consumed him from within. "I know," he whispered softly in reply, his voice barely audible in the hot air. They had buried the bodies of the slain, digging a common grave under the merciless sun, which beat down relentlessly. Elijah couldn't utter a single word of prayer, feeling unworthy even of that small act. Sarah remained silent, her face seemingly expressing only icy contempt. When the work was finally done, she climbed silently into the wagon, not uttering a single word. Elijah hitched the mare, sighed heavily, and continued his journey, understanding that he would have to carry this burden of loneliness to the very end of his days. Now between them, like a gaping wound, lay a chasm filled with blood and murder. After a few days, they reached a small town, lost in the mountains, like a forgotten corner of the world. The town bore the name Providence, and the name seemed to him a bitter mockery of fate. Poverty and desolation reigned in the town, as if death had walked its streets. Elijah hoped that here, far from the noise and bustle of civilization, they would find the refuge they desperately needed. He rented a small room in a dilapidated but cheap hotel, where the walls remembered dozens of guests, and the creaking floorboards seemed to whisper forgotten stories. Sarah hardly spoke to him. Her silence seemed to be another manifestation of the desolation of these places. For days on end, she wandered the deserted streets, peering into the faces of passers-by, hoping to find even the most modest job. Elijah desperately tried to talk to her, again and again, explaining that it was precisely for their safety that he had decided on this desperate step. But Sarah stubbornly refused to listen to him, turning away and hiding her gaze. One day, miners returned to the town from a gold mine. Rumor had it that they had stumbled upon a vein promising untold riches. The news of this instantly spread throughout the area, like a fire, attracting new people to Providence, hungry for easy profit. Elijah sensed a scent in the air, not just of gunpowder, but also of money. And with it, something far more perilous, the violence that, as he knew, always followed gold like a shadow. Soon, suspicious characters began to frequent the quiet town. Their coarse faces and greedy eyes revealed them as outsiders, bringing with them unease. They started buying up land, intimidating the locals, sowing fear and panic. Observing the unfolding events, Elijah felt trouble closing in. He understood that action was necessary. A flicker of hope to regain Sarah's trust warmed his heart, so he decided to speak with her. He needed to explain that they couldn't stand aside while such blatant injustice occurred. When Sarah returned home, Elijah said resolutely, "Sarah, we need to leave here." She looked at him with disdain and asked, "Why? Are you scared?" "No, I'm not scared. I just know this is going to be bad. These people..." He hesitated, searching for the right words, trying to convey the gravity of the situation. Sarah cut him off, saying, "These people are just like you. Cruel, heartless." Elijah sighed heavily. In her, he saw a reflection of himself, the person he had been many years ago when his heart was equally cold. He knew he had to find a way to reach her hardened soul, or they were doomed. That same night, in the modest inn where they were staying, tragedy struck. One of the miners was found dead, a knife plunged into his back. The town buzzed like a disturbed beehive. The sheriff, an elderly man with wrinkles that furrowed his weary face, was bewildered. He sensed something more lay behind the murder than a simple drunken brawl in a tavern. Elijah felt old. Familiar instincts awakened within him. He knew he would have to intervene to restore justice, no matter the cost. He began his own investigation. He questioned the locals, frequented the saloons, and observed suspicious characters closely. Gradually, it dawned on him. A gang was behind the killing, newly arrived in town with a single goal: to seize the gold mine. These thugs were trying to intimidate the miners, forcing them to abandon their work so they could take control of the mine themselves. Elijah felt anger rising in his chest. He realized he would have to confront these villains. He felt alone, like a wolf caught in a trap, but there was no other way. He had to protect the town, protect Sarah. Gathering his courage, he went to the sheriff and shared his suspicions. The sheriff, though distrustful of Elijah, knew he needed help. "I know your past, preacher," the sheriff said, crossing his arms. "But in this town, you'll have to prove you've changed." Elijah nodded, knowing this was his last chance. The following day, as the sun rose above the horizon, painting the square in golden hues, the miners and bandits met. A ringing silence hung in the air, broken only by occasional sighs. The bandits, grim and sullen, demanded that the miners relinquish their rights to the mine. The miners, pale with fear, exchanged uncertain glances, wavering in their decision. Elijah, appearing as if from nowhere, strode forward, his footsteps echoing across the square. He challenged the bandit leader, a huge, muscular man whose eyes seemed to radiate an icy coldness. "Choose your weapon," Elijah declared, his voice firm and resolute. The crowd, holding its breath, froze in anticipation. Sarah, standing in the throng, watched in horror. Her heart hammered in her chest, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope. She saw the bloody Eli awaken within him. Fury ignited in his gaze, and the fight began. Elijah, despite being over 70 years old, fought skillfully and ruthlessly, as though death itself danced in his movements. He employed all the skills honed through years of training and forged in countless past skirmishes. He knew he couldn't lose. More than just his life was at stake. He managed to defeat several opponents, but there were too many bandits, a true horde. He felt his strength failing, his muscles cramping. At that moment, Sarah, unable to stand aside any longer, charged into the fray. She grabbed a revolver lying on the ground, the cold metal in her sweaty hand, and began firing at the bandits, not even aiming. Her movements were erratic, but the fury boiling within her guided the bullets. Several bandits groaned, felled by her unexpected onslaught. Then, abandoning Elijah, the bandits, in their savage mob, turned on Sarah. Overcoming agonizing pain, Elijah, summoning his last reserves of strength, rushed to her aid. He selflessly defended Sarah from the enraged bandits, but in the ensuing struggle, he received a serious wound. At that critical moment, as if sent from the heavens, the sheriff and his deputies arrived. Caught completely off guard, the bandits were immediately arrested. A deathly silence descended upon the moonlit square. Elijah, bleeding profusely, lay still upon the ground. Sarah, kneeling beside him, wept uncontrollably. Her cheeks were wet with tears, and her heart ached with sorrow. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling with both emotion and gratitude. Elijah offered a weak smile, knowing these were his final moments. "You saved me too," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He felt life slowly abandoning him, leaving behind only weakness and coldness. Overcoming the pain, he carefully took her hand, squeezing it, attempting to convey all his gratitude in that gesture. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice like a gentle breeze. "You are free now." He closed his eyes, and the world around him fell into silence. The next day, when Elijah was being laid to rest, Sarah stood at his grave. The contempt that had tormented her heart before was gone. Now she felt only profound pain and regret that she would never hear his voice again. She suddenly realized that he was not the monster her imagination had painted him to be, but simply a man trying to atone for his sins. Realizing this, she remained in Providence. Sarah began to assist the sheriff in his difficult battle against crime. She rose to defend those who were weak and defenseless, those who needed her aid. Fear departed her heart forever. She knew that although Elijah was dead, his spirit would always be with her. He had taught her to be strong, to fight for justice, never to surrender to any difficulty. Time passed, and Sarah earned universal respect. They called her the preacher's daughter, and this title was the most honorable for her. She often remembered her first meeting with Elijah, his shadowed past, and his final act, which had changed her life forever. She knew he would remain a part of her destiny eternally. She kept his old revolver, a silent reminder of the eternal struggle between light and darkness that lurks within each of us. Years went by. Sarah had grown old. Gray hairs now crowned her head, yet an undimmed spark still shone within her eyes. Then one day, a young man arrived in Providence. He was tall, with eyes the color of a stormy sky, mirroring the tempest brewing within. He had come to learn about his grandfather, a man he had never met. Sarah recounted Elijah's entire story, from the very beginning to the final page. She spoke of his sins, his downfall, and of course, his redemption, his great love. The young man listened, holding his breath, his gaze fixed upon her face. Pride swelled within him for this man, his grandfather, whom he had never had the chance to know. When Sarah finished her tale, the young man finally said, "Now I understand everything. He was a hero." Sarah smiled, faint wrinkles crinkling at the corners of her eyes, betraying her many years. She knew Elijah hadn't died in vain. His story, like a bright torch, continued to light the way, and his legacy would live on in the hearts of those who remembered him and believed in his ideals. Life in Providence seemed never to stop. Sarah, despite being over 70 years old, continued to fight for justice tirelessly. She had become a living symbol of hope and faith for many citizens of the city. She knew this was exactly what Elijah had wanted, for his cause to continue. Sometimes, when the sun, like a gigantic fiery ball, began its journey toward the horizon, Sarah would visit Elijah's grave. She would stand silently, her gaze fixed westward, toward where he had once walked his path, seeking peace. She believed a day would come when they would meet again. Then everything would end, all the suffering and pain. But for now, she had to keep fighting. And in that new world, where there would be neither evil nor violence, they would be together forever. As long as she carried in her heart the memory of his deeds, his fight for justice, his yearning for redemption, she knew he had never truly died. His light continued to burn within her soul, warming and strengthening her. This certainty gave her the strength to continue living and fighting for a bright future, the future Elijah had envisioned. She was alone in the twilight, the wind playing in her red hair, scattering it across her shoulders. She stood on the crest of the hill, gazing at the distant horizon where the sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in crimson and gold, as if heralding the approaching night. At that moment, she felt a deep, all-encompassing peace. She knew that in his memory, in her actions, she held a piece of his soul. And this would be with her forever. Soon another group of riders appeared on the horizon. There were approximately 20 of them, slowly closing the distance. Sarah, sensing trouble, slowly reached for the revolver, which was always with her, a reminder of the past, of her mentor. She knew perfectly well that silence and tranquility were fleeting luxuries, rare in these wild lands. Sarah straightened, preparing for another confrontation, for a new chapter in her life, where she would face the same difficulties as before, but now filled with new meaning, new hope, passed on to her by Elijah. She remembered every word he said, every lesson he taught. She knew her path would be thorny, but fear was no longer present. She was no longer a solitary orphan. Now she was his daughter, and she would walk this path until the very end, as long as her heart beat within her chest, as long as her strength endured. This would be her revenge, her redemption, her very life itself.